Sheldon was actually the founding director of the Arthur C. Clarke Human Imagination Center at UCSD, and it was part of the Center of the Hybrid Multi-Core Productivity Research. And he was also co-founder of the California Institute for Telecommunications, and that actually it was something that I believe that Larry Smarr, who was the founding director of NCSA, moved to San Diego, and with Sheldon created. Apparently, after that, I think Sheldon was actually went to University College London to become the creative director, or the director of the creative computing. I think that they were going to create a whole new institute there. And currently, actually, Sheldon has established, and he's a co-founder and of many startup companies, and he's actually currently a vice president of product design and innovation at Vibrella, which is a company that also co-founded. But as I mentioned, he has several companies that has confounded so far, and he has been the founder of and the developer of the technologies. So without further ado, and apologizing for Zoom coming in and out for me, so I would like to give now the floor to Sheldon to talk to us about AI and some of the interesting thoughts and provocative ideas. Thank you all, and thank you, Sheldon, for taking the time to be with us today.
Well, thanks, Nick. And I think we're going to have a little bit of technology hiccups in a couple of spaces here today. So I'm grateful for everybody's patience and understanding as we all do the best we can with the technology that we're trying to use here. And maybe one of the first things I'll do is I'll suggest a different technology that we could all be using to hold a meeting like this, that is one of these companies that I'm currently vice president of right now. But maybe, and so the talk today is going to have like 3 different parts to it. And there's like a bunch of videos, but we can't seem to get these videos to work. So I'll end up skipping over some of the videos, and which is too bad, but we'll still have plenty to talk about here. So I think one thing that, as Nick kind of gave some of these points of reference for my career, it maybe can look quite eclectic. I'm a computer scientist, I'm an artist, I've been primarily in academia, although my whole time in academia, always doing lots of business consulting for big business as well as startup. And but then out of my lab, there's been a few startups that have spun out, and now I'm focusing, a lot of attention in particular on one of them. Because it's very timely right now. And so, as I see myself, sometimes people are like, well, what are you? Are you an artist? Are you a professor of computer science? Are you a business person? And the answer is yes. I do encapsulate all these things. And I think it's very telling to something that I hope is a takeaway message from this talk, is that, we're really at the moment, we're in the midst of a really profound transformation in human cultural activity. And it's, and it's been motivated, I would say, primarily because of computing. And so there have been always these different, human cultural activity organizes itself into different categories over time, because it, makes sense to kind of provide focus in different areas. And sometimes those areas get increasingly siloed and deep, and, have arcane knowledge bases that, require, complete dedication to. But we're at a moment where, while that's still very much the case, we also have these technologies and not even simply the technologies, but these concepts that are somewhat arising from technology that necessitate us thinking really laterally and across different kinds of categories. So for instance, one of the things I founded at UCSD was this Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination. And it was a center that is really specifically focused on trying to understand the phenomena of human imagination. And to do that, we need to think about cognitive science and neuroscience and artistic creation and literary culture. And all of these things are components in what we might consider to be the imagination. And if we're wanting to actually think about a concept as ineffable as imagination, we should be informed by views from those different areas and think about how answers from those different areas might help influence the way we further investigate a phenomenon like that. So that, kind of talks a little bit about the interdisciplinarity. But then I've also been, really motivated and interested to think about how my work gets out into the world. And so a lot of it for my career has been as an artist. I create exhibitions that are exhibited internationally at, primarily at contemporary art museums. And but I've also been working to spin technologies out to create companies that have a different way in which the work engages the world. And so I'm always interested in these opportunities that, try to bring together and bridge intellectual disciplines, but also kind of cultural realms, like the space between academic research and, cultural production or, or new kinds of business ventures. So right now, about 3 years ago, I was finding myself in a place where I was ready to do some transition of my career, and I was recruited by a new institute that was starting in London, the Creative Computing Institute, that was going to take a lot of the things that I'd been doing at UCSD and now kind of utilize, from my perspective, the best pieces of that to build a new platform for a new research institute. So I joined there, moved to London a few years back, and helped start this institute. And at the same time, had a company that had spun out of my lab called Virbela, which is a virtual world company. And I continued to be a consultant for that company, and seemed to be a pretty good balance between starting this new research institute in London and working with this virtual world platform company called Virbela. And then the COVID thing hit. And when COVID hit, a few things happened. The academic environment got put into a very difficult situation, which every university in the world ran into. We were in the midst of building out our facility, and that got put on an indefinite hold. And in the meantime, Virbela is this virtual world platform that was created to allow people from all over the world to come together in this kind of metaphor of physical space, and collaborate with people through avatars, have things that range from meetings or presentations with thousands of people to small group interactions between a few people at a time. And this seemed to be one of these kind of tools like Zoom, which was really well positioned for helping the world adapt to COVID lockdown state of existence. And so, so as the university was kind of moving into some slowdown modes, and this company has been exploding in terms of its growth. So I took a leave from the university in London and joined Virbela full-time to help guide its next phase of development as the VP of Product Design and Innovation. And so we've been, so we have, and essentially the idea with Virbela is we have a set of virtual world technologies that we package and license to different companies based on the kind of types of things they're trying to do and the scale that they're doing them at. And so we focus on enterprise companies, event companies, as well as education market. And so every client gets their own customized, semi-customized virtual world platform to engage with. And we have now, hundreds of these out there that are licensed to different people. So we see it as a, and improvements and feedback from different clients end up, kind of feeding into the entire base platform. So we get, it's a continuously improving environment. And we're about to launch its next version, probably in end of Q2 or beginning of Q3, that will have kind of an entirely different look and feel to it and operate at scale, a bigger and bigger scale. And so there's a number of companies that are doing aspects of this out there right now. And we have some things that we think are differentiators for our platform. And one is the scale that we're able to support within the virtual worlds and the kinds of affordances we give people that are really focused first and foremost on interaction, engagement, and collaboration. So this is it's a virtual world platform. It's not although we do have a virtual reality interface that you can do with it, but we were virtual world first as opposed to virtual reality first, because we have in our user base, well, I would say there's a lot of competitors that have gone out there to support virtual reality as the first step. And we always saw that as our second step, not our first step. And VR platforms, like the kind of one of our inside jokes is there's more people developing virtual reality than using virtual reality. But a virtual world platform just uses a desktop as an interface. And so it has a very low bar of adoption to get people to interact and engage with it. And we try to make it a very simple, easy to use environment, because our purpose is not to get people trying to play a video game or do something extraordinarily complicated. The extraordinarily complicated thing we want people to do is their daily work activities. And we want the environment to be as easy as possible to support the use of these concepts to support that daily work activity. And so some of the environments, so we have different kinds of environments for different clients. We have, people can't run large conferences or expositions, so we have expo halls that clients will rent, and then they will rent out booths to different exhibitors for different things. We're doing actually right as we speak, there's a huge boating conference going on in France right now that's got 30,000 people in a boating exposition conference going on. So all these kind of unusual, what seem to be unusual use cases for these kinds of environments, but they basically are the ways in which real world activities have been able to port into these environments. And so we spun this company out about 5 years ago from the university and started working with a number of single clients slowly building up. One of our early clients was a real estate company called EXP, and they were trying to become a national real estate company. They had about a few hundred agents scattered around the country when they started using us, and one of their concepts was they were going to try to have a national real estate company, but not own any real estate themselves. They wanted to do it without investing in brick and mortar. So they started trying to explore what virtual platforms might be there, and they found us and started using us. Well, in 5 years, they grew from 200 agents to now 55,000 agents. And they went from operating in the US to now operating in 14, went from almost nothing to now, I think it's $2 billion or maybe $4 billion. Anyway, they acquired us about 3 years ago as we became kind of critical to their company and helped really kind of fuel our growth. So we're privately held within EXP World Holdings, and they've kind of helped us continue to invest in the platform, grow and expand our use cases. We have dozens of other, as I said, several hundred other clients. I had some videos which maybe I'm going to try to see if this will play if I click on the YouTube video. Is not even coming up. Okay. Do you still all see? Maybe you can't respond, but
yes, Sheldon, we see your presentation.
Okay. Although the video isn't playing, so
It's not in presenter mode.
maybe I will skip the video. Okay, let me go back to the presentation. No. Okay, well, there's a bunch of great videos out there about people using this. If anyone's interested, I'll compile some links of all the videos that I was going to show in this presentation. So you can have a lovely evening at home with a glass of wine and a big YouTube playlist. So I wanted to just kind of like give a little bit of a dive into that company because what I think that company really represented in a way is, the outcome of this body of artistic work that I've been doing for 25 years before that, which had always been exploring the relationship between richer forms of digital spatial experiences and how they mixed between what the digital realm offered and what our expectations of space itself were. So we've evolved as embodied spatial creatures for the hundreds of thousands and back to millions of years of the evolution of who we are as humans. And so much of our cognitive capacities are about us as existing within bodies within space. And so when we finally got to start to develop this realm of virtual reality and virtual worlds, it was really the first time we were able to bring the accelerated capacities of electronic media to the ways in which we might structure spatial experiences. And so with Virbela, it's really critical that we're utilizing these, this kind of innate cognitive social spatial capacity as the way in which you're interacting in this space. And so it's a very different kind of way of creating social environments than what we're doing right now with Zoom. And for the moment, it doesn't have the kind of like expressive, facial features or the ability to kind of always wave my hands around to conjure up these concepts in the way that a video chat has, but those are things we're increasingly moving towards. Like our next generation of avatars will have facial expressions and track your voice, other kinds of things. But as I said, this is kind of like the outcome of this investigation that I've really been doing as an artist for many years, and also it's exploring some other dimensions of what this digital realm in relationship to kind of human development has been is enabling us to do. And that other kind of realm is around artificial intelligence. And so another kind of thread that's been parallel with my exploration of kind of a virtual space and its relationship to our kind of human cognition has been just the subject of cognition itself. And so as I described at the very beginning, it was part of the motivation to undertake this study of human imagination very deliberately and try to devise what I think is a theory of human imagination that allows us to think about our own perceptions and how our sense, and essentially to try to boil it down into a couple of sentences, how our own sense of what reality is underpinned by our perceptions, our memories, and our imagination. And so when we, anytime we think of what the state of the real is, it's because we're kind of making a connection between what we remember, what we anticipate, and what we sense in the moment. And so if we kind of use that as a nexus, what we then can do is start to go down each one of those pathways and think about, what is the kind of phenomena of memory? How does the personal connect to the social, to the historical? How do our forms of culture encapsulate that and present that? What are the basis of our perceptions? How does the world reveal itself to us? What are the limits and extent of our perceptual apparatus? And then what is the basis of anticipation? How do we anticipate how things go from one moment to the next? How do we anticipate how things go from the near term to the short term to the long term? And again, how might there be kind of neurological underpinnings to these phenomena? And how do these become the basis of kind of cultural scaffolds that allow us to build upon those and extend our conceptions and our imaginations in ways that are, incredibly remarkable and for which we really don't have other good analogs. And then as we do this, how do we start to then consider places in which we might create more overt interventions in that schema? And so I would say, I would look at something like artificial intelligence as one of these interventions. And there's a little video here that was going to explain all of that really concisely. But so I can oversell the video because I can't show it. But all of this is to now, what I want to do is actually the meat of the talk. It hasn't even started yet. So now I want to kind of go into what I really wanted to talk about, which is a way to think about artificial intelligence. And as a combination of sets of technologies, but also a kind of cultural a cultural perspective, and this talk actually comes out of work that I'd been doing. I was a consultant for Google Brain for a few years, and we were trying to think about culture and artificial intelligence. And this in a way was kind of an outcome of that work. This was a part I was also going to try and show a video, which doesn't even seem to want to work at all. So forgive me, I'm going to kind of end up reading most of this talk now, just so I don't ramble too much, which I tend to do. So what I want to talk about here is fiction, science, fiction, science, fiction, science. To think about how these terms modify each other and how their various combinations have certain kinds of meanings. And exploring this specifically in relationship to the development of artificial intelligence. We understand that the terms science and fiction have different implications in human cultural activity. One term characterizes the means and methods by which we try to discover universal truths, and the other is fiction. And fiction has a much longer history in humanity than science does. Fiction has been the means by which we've explored the complexities of the human experience to try to create coherent wholes out of disparate parts, and to help us better able to consider our actions and meaning of the world around us and our possible fate within it. Fiction and science seem to describe aspects of understanding that are orthogonal to each other, with science as a pursuit of truth and fiction as a pursuit of meaning, and for how truth and meaning are both characterized. So one area in which we've got a conjunction, kind of really fairly known conjunction of these terms, is modifying fiction with science to get science fiction. And we're all generally aware that this describes a genre of fiction that uses concepts that have a basis in science and technology as narrative provocations. This genre of fiction has been around for arguably 150 years. It's developed a very rich and complex set of works over that time. And it's an area that seemingly has become increasingly important to enable broader awareness of the ways in which technology and science are rapidly developing and transforming our human condition. But can we flip these terms and create and get fiction science? Is that a useful cultural concept? And what might the term fiction science imply and mean? And I think it could have a few different meanings. One of which is a scientific study of fiction, what fiction is, how it operates cognitively, socially, and evolutionarily. Some cross between neuroscience, cognitive science, psychology, sociology, history, anthropology, and literary narrative studies. And there's work out there that's being done in this way, but they don't use the term fiction science. It's called things like cognitive narrative studies or cultural anthropology, which sound more academic and more specific, and are less likely to be mistaken for some other possibly more pejorative readings of the term fiction science. And I'd say some of these, fiction science could be something in which the tropes of science are used to give activities that are not scientific at all, some sort of authority about truth that the term science conveys. Things like maybe faith healing or astrology might be considered as kind of fictional sciences or fiction science. Or the term might be used to imply that science is itself in part fictional and therefore has a more complicated relationship to the truth than we typically acknowledge. And even that reading could be used in a couple of ways, one of which is more philosophically driven exploration of the nature and limits of knowledge. But it could also be used to cynically undermine scientific findings that are politically inconvenient to other agendas. So those are maybe some downsides to a term fiction science. But I'm going to try to use this as a framework to think about the phenomena we call artificial intelligence, that it is an ongoing development of both science and fiction, that artificial intelligence belongs to both, and its pursuit is the result of a productive interaction between those domains. And if we consider it from both its state as fiction and its state as science, it might further help us clarify the meaning of being human as we explore underlying truths about knowledge and computation and try to connect those to the meaning of what it is to be human. So I would state that the concept of artificial intelligence comes from its speculation in science fiction that precedes its technological implementations and the pursuit of its underlying science. And that these speculations have shaped the aspirations for what AI might be able to become or avoid becoming. And while our musings on AI have been exploring highly developed AI systems for some time, the underlying technologies have recently been undergoing some significant developments that are provoking new widespread consideration of how AI technologies can and should be developed. The should have questions are coming under increasing scrutiny and interest, spurred on by its particular cultural history. And all of this is what I think positions AI as a kind of fiction science. And so recognizing AI in this way, I would hope can allow us to better consider the further development of its technology and how it relates to better understanding human experience. And an aspect of this is to also help us better consider AI's reification. So how do we actually come to experience the outcomes of AI? How does AI have presence in the world? And how does that factor into its agency? So there are three motifs I want us to keep in mind as we think about these questions around AI. I want us to think about reciprocity, apparency, and transformation. And these come from how we see AI, how AI sees us, and the transformational stakes that artificial intelligence provokes. So we've been encountering AI for decades in our fictions, and much of it has been dystopian. AI is other than human. It's our offspring that arises up and dominates or eliminates its parents. It usurps the anthropocentric specialness of our human self-conscious awareness. But we've also had the opposite, where AI is a childlike, naive, and helpful servant. So we can have bad AI that preys on our anxieties and our human tribalism, or a good AI that is sentimental, childish, and subordinate. But none of these fictional AIs were really created from much more than a very cursory basis in the underlying sciences and technologies of AI. It would be generous to say that they were an extrapolation of those, as they were, quite underdeveloped in relationship to their fictional manifestations. If the bads rung truer than the good, it's mostly due to their narrative roles, not their kind of technological determinants. The ways in which the narrative roles of these bad AIs have been doppelgangers of ourselves, confronting existential dilemmas of right and wrong, purpose and meaning. And to this point, it's been harder to write and represent what is good about good AI beyond servitude and loyalty. And I think it's because we're just coming to understand the value of the technologies that are developed under the banner of AI, or how these technologies embody, amplify, or distort the values of those that are creating them. But our fictional AIs, our fictional representations of AI have primed us to be both terribly excited and terribly worried about what it might become. Representations of these technologies in fictions have provided a myriad of thought experiments about possible outcomes, as well as to characterize the targets for future technological developments. So, what about these technologies of artificial intelligence that are under development? And so AI, it isn't a single technology, but a set of computational methods that aim to give computational systems similar capabilities to how humans interact with our material and social world. So it could be seen to begin with the ability to perceive the world, such as the ability to see and classify objects, the ability to read text, the ability to understand speech. From these perceptions, it proceeds to interpretations, that classification of an image, the deducing of meaning in text, the translation of text across languages, or plotting a course of movement through space. Those interpretations then can lead to the taking of action, how disconnected data could be linked in relevant ways to create meaningful text, images, or sounds, how autonomous agents and vehicles and robots could be controlled to actually move through those environments where courses have been plotted. And there have been a variety of techniques that have been developed to do these things. But recently, much of the excitement of breakthroughs in technologies under AI have been from the rapid developments of computers' capabilities to program themselves, in part, on tasks that we weren't able to figure out how to specify more precisely. So, since the rise of computation, we've gone through periods of getting hot and cold and hot and cold and hot again about the pursuit of AI from the engineering perspective. First we thought that intelligence was exemplified by doing things that involve being clever with systems that had complicated sets of rules, like playing chess. And so AI programming techniques constructed large graphs of how those rules might be followed, called expert systems. And we were able to get computers that did really well with those complicated activities and able to beat chess grandmasters. But then the methods by which the computer accomplished those feats were looked at and deemed to not really be good examples of artificial intelligence, because the method that was used was too artificial. The solution had nothing to do with how we think human intelligence works. And that critique, I think, leads to a realization that an aspect of the science of AI falls into at least two areas. One of which is underlying computer science of these technologies, the math involved in these techniques, and the way that can be enacted through the development of new computational methods. And for that, the amount of artificiality involved, and whether or not it actually is a parallel to human intelligence really doesn't matter. But the other aspect of artificial intelligence is thinking that artificial intelligence is a method for us to try to understand the basis of intelligence itself as it exists in biological models, gaining insight into such areas as cognition, creativity, and consciousness. So the methods of AI that are now in vogue are inspired by an understanding of neurology, taking both of the scientific methods of neurology together with computational models. So the idea of working with a model of a neuron as an underlying feature of computational artificial intelligence is actually a very old idea in computational theory, and but has gained great currency with the developments of large-scale computational systems and large data repositories. So here, with a neural network, a programmer can specify a basic structure of what a neural net might consist of, but the specific values are derived by the software itself, creating programs whose underlying details end up being unknown by the programmers. So with the ability to create these connections between these extensive data sets and lots of high fidelity sensors, even increasingly effective actuators, with increasingly amount of underlying computational capacity, these semi-automated systems are able to find interesting, viable, self-regulating relationships that seem to echo concepts that we have about the nature of intelligence itself. So we have now this ability to create a different way of creating software with a different class of problems that software is enabling us to look at and might be able to undertake. And these methods are being rapidly mobilized by governments and industry. But our cinematic representations of AI have often reduced the complexities of this emergent condition to autonomous singularities. While our actual emerging AI condition comes about with the opportunities of our distributed, interconnected, widely differentiated sociocultural condition. So our fictional antecedents may have prepared us to face the wrong AI conditions. All that preparatory cultural work may have even ironically taken away our own human agency in the system, misleading us as to where we need to be attenuated to where the real action of AI is taking place. So as we develop AI, we also need to further develop our literacy of what AI is, how to move well past those early cultural speculations on what AI was supposedly going to become, to better recognize what it actually is in its process of becoming. We need to develop a more sophisticated vocabulary of AI's cultural operation as it comes into being. So currently, these inscrutable objects are some of the most widely used interfaces in kind of mass culture to AI systems. And we can locate the aesthetics of these objects and the underlying ideologies to some common points of origin. So one of these is the visual vocabulary of minimalism, which these objects utilize without taking on the intellectual stakes that were involved in minimalist art, which had much to do with the interrogation of material properties. So they were overt at putting those forward as the subject of the artwork, as opposed to using them to refer to other subjects. So they're highly self-referential in their aesthetics and their methods. Another antecedent, I would say, was certainly how. As a distributed stoic interface to an underlying intelligence, Hal's uninflected tone revealed little about his developing psychosis and provided us with a dry template for the current Alexis and series of our world. But with narrative stakes in play, Kubrick used an efficient aesthetic strategy to stage the Oedipal conflict between human and machine. And this, I think, is primarily located in the eye, how each of these see their world and how they are seeing, either through the blue eyes of Dave or the red eye of Hal. And this relates to an underlying value proposition that goes along with this AI. And it's about the Dave transmutating to a new state of consciousness, becoming more human than human through his encounter with his upstart offspring. Hal wasn't so lucky in this process, but his mind did have an interior, and and that was Hal's problem, is that Hal had a psychology. And so in order to actually deal with Hal, we have to actually go into his mind and do deep psychoanalytical work to turn it off. Now, the minimalist impulses of our current AI devices is a continuation of what I think has been a really profound technological development in our cultural moment, which the mobile phone really well encapsulates, where we're in the process of dematerializing all these discrete different types of devices. All these activities used to be manifested in a device. We've dematerialized the need for those devices and collapsed all of those functions into a single minimal form. But I think the minimal form of this universal communication device plays a different role than that of our emerging AI. And I think it's because AI phenomena I would characterize as more emergent than convergent. And it has different profound stakes that need to engage us more completely than the cool reductiveness of minimalist aesthetics. We will be better served by being as explicit about those things as we can be, even when, and maybe even particularly when, they get a little bit weird. And so if we embrace the weirdness of AI, I think we will find AI to be more engaging, more interesting, and it will be a more effective way of understanding the extent of agency that these systems have, what their level of autonomy is, their scope of engagements with people, the environment, and with other AIs. Now, I also want to just point out that there's another kind of basis that I think is important to the minimalist aesthetics and AI aesthetics that we currently have. Minimalism had its heyday as a precursor to the 1960s utopianism, which still has been this kind of bedrock legacy ideology of much of the tech industry. 60s utopianism took ideas from libertarianism and anarchism, where disruption was a virtue, and valued the delegitimization of regulatory political states to serve the business interests of what could be pejoratively thought of as Ponzi scheme stock valuations, fueled by the commoditization of users' personal data. And a kind of an interesting text for this was the Whole Earth Catalog as a kind of a Bible of the moment. And its structure, I think, is quite interesting because it had a little bit of a why. So a Whole Earth Catalog, hundreds of pages, this book of hundreds of pages that has a paragraph on its purpose, and then hundreds of pages about how. So a little bit of why and a whole lot of how. Now, alongside the aesthetics of minimalism, 1960s vanguard aesthetics also had another thread, which was pop psychedelia. And psychedelia is a way to try to come to terms with internal mental states. And we've started to see aspects of that as an aesthetic of artificial intelligence as well, in things such as Google's Deep Dream and other generative neural network environments. So psychedelia giving us this uncanny view into human consciousness. Here we have a kind of representational form that expresses underlying processes of the way in which AI methods themselves are operating. So interrogating aspects of the interior of a neural net as opposed to the kind of outcome and as opposed to the normative results of it. So understanding how AI makes meaning, its epistemology, I think is going to be essential to our effective relationship to it. the visual modality or the articulation of AI needs to be bidirectional. How we see it and how it sees us need to develop a shared vocabulary. We need to sense the time to reflect reality, for instance, which is the metric of time lag between the world as it is and the world as it's known by machines. And that way we start to get a better sense of what AI systems actually think the world is. We need to be able to sense and understand that. As we figure out how to live with AI, we must recognize that it's going to also be in rapid state of transformation. And we're going to have to be ready to continuously let go of our understanding of today's AIs as tomorrow's AIs come into being. So we're going to have to be more intellectually and culturally nimble, I think, than we've ever had to be in the course of human history. So I want to try and give us another way to think, maybe even think a little bit, still very abstractly about AI and its developments. And that is to try to reflect on what we might want AI to continue, how we want AI to continue to develop, and how we can use AI status as a fiction science to help to think through those developments. So I want to consider AI in a utopian framework. And as I mentioned earlier, part of the ideology that underpins the tech industry has come from a California utopianism that idealizes libertarianism and immortality. But I think that utopianism has a bit of a problem in that it, you know, as a professor, I would say that utopian movement didn't finish reading the book and recognize that the operation of utopian narratives as thought experiments have taken on increasingly sophistication and complexity in fields like science fiction that show them not to be singular answers to complicated questions, but a way to put the conundrums of a condition on the table to consider in total. So what I want to try and think about is what can the value propositions of AI really be? And how by considering it from the point of view of value propositions, might start to develop a program of representations that would reinforce and guide us to what we need to see and how AI should be seen or could be seen. So with more time, we would go through a history of utopian literature here to try to tease out some themes from them, but I would just say at a kind of a very high level that utopian literature often comes around when there are really significant transformations across our sociocultural reality. And that there are times when we recognize that these conditions created by us, that if we're able to think deeply and comprehensively enough through them, we may be able to help drive to a more desirable outcome. And so utopian texts articulate their underlying values and the ways in which their systems are structured and how our social interactions within them have the possibilities of playing out. So right now, I think we have the opportunity and need to drive forward a program of AI utopianism. The opportunity is the technological potential and the reframing of our ontological condition, and the needs are the variety of crises that we face and the requirements that we have to devise methods and the literacy to understand those conditions. What I fear is that we are coming to the era of Murphy's Law. While we might be taken out by a meteor or zapped by some new pathogen, or an old one if we fail, getting vaccinated, we're probably going to be mostly working to ameliorate the effects of human activity by attempting better human activity. Whether this is global warming or an ecosystem that's faltering under microplastic ubiquity, or the alienness of artificial intelligence that controls our systems and us. We need AI to be thought about as a means to help us avoid our end. So as a proposal, I would say a starting point for our AI utopia is to think about it in a cogno-positivistic perspective. How can AI be used to maximize our collective cognition, individually and socially? Human first, and then non-human second. And probably the biggest impact that AI systems could have is just to help us improve the very basic aspects of being human across the globe. This is the foundation for addressing resource inequality, environmental degradation, and false narrative issues that are really going to do us in. All of which take us further away from conditions of peace, well-being, and understanding. You know, recognizing that progress is not justice in and of itself. That to be just, progress must move towards just ends, and that the just ends of progress means moving towards satisfying the vital needs of everybody. We need AI to help us counter neo-tribalism as barriers of self, nation, geography, temporality, communication, and sexuality dissolve away. We definitely have seen this growing global neo-tribalist reversion that's trying to counter these transformations, belief circles that are taking advantage of the rapid transformation of the social to paint their own pictures of reality and reject that we live in a shared, objective, interdependent reality. We also need to recognize that the social institutions that churn through our post-Enlightenment era are either not up to the task of this new global condition, or that we've taken them so much for granted that realizing that we've forgotten how aspirational, fragile, human-made, and improbable houses of cards they are, and need to be continuously attended to. Underpinning this is universal education that strives to be equitable and meritocratic, systems of law that have equivalent applicability to all public discourse in which truth and facts matters, scientific evidence that validates effect in common governments and promotes widespread social good. You know, when we think about the founding ideals of the Enlightenment, the dare to know almost sounds shockingly provocative in relationship to much of our today's popular and intellectual discourses. And, you know, and those are the kind of, you know, human areas that we need to help, that AI can help us optimize. And none of that had to actually do with computational methods in and of themselves, but just the values that our computational methods as they develop can be done in relationship to. But as we wrestle with this problem of recognizing and understanding AI, we also would be well served to take note of how much sophisticated cognition we're surrounded by that we don't understand well at all. Even though we've evolved, you know, right alongside all of these other systems and likely have far more in common with any of them than we are likely to have with a computer system anytime within the foreseeable future. So even when we acknowledge this, we've been mostly stymied in trying to understand and engage these things as cognitive phenomena, except for in pretty trivial ways, which are most often about how these things are able to engage things on our terms. So, you know, an octopus can open a jar. We think that's obviously very intelligent. If a dolphin can, you know, carry sensors and weapons to ships, you know, we recognize that has a high degree of intelligence, or chimpanzees or apes able to operate computer interfaces, then they're obviously intelligent. But there's lots of other phenomena out there that that won't play. So that's unfortunate. So, for instance, these are this is a white blood cell chasing a virus through a bloodstream, and in this video you can see the white blood cell navigates a complex environment. It has a goal-oriented, activity. It's very clever and savvy about where it can, and exhibits things that we would really recognize as sophisticated decision-making processes. But of course, the white blood cell doesn't have even a single neuron. Or colonies of bacteria that are able to move in what appear to be very complex social organizational structures. Yet again, entities without brains, seeming to exhibit features that if we were doing them in a robot or a swarm of robots, we would characterize as exhibiting forms of intelligence. So I would say one thing that we should do as we're thinking about our AI design systems as we're going forward is really recognizing that we are designing, complex ecosystems, that our AI systems will have relationships with other AI systems and with non-AI systems. And how we will make these apparent and understand them will continue to stretch our own ability of considering what entities are, what systems are, where things begin, where things end. And this is this kind of ongoing expansion of our own kind of human conception and understanding of what constitutes the real. And I think art has long played a really critical role in this, that it gives us a means of engaging what is initially kind of a cognitive estrangement. Art harnesses this cognitive estrangement to expand our human understanding. And I think from this, what I'm, think we need is a new law that takes us from Moore's law, hopefully helps us avoid much of Murphy's law, but is really aimed at looking at accelerating our imagination and insight to bind us to the expansion of human consciousness, to better understand and imagine effect and the impact at radical new scales. And that's what's required here as we develop these systems. And so I'm going to borrow this law from Arthur C. Clarke and his second law, which is the only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. And that's what I think is really the important work that our arts do for us, in finding our existing limits of how we think and understand, and then moving us past those limitations. So through art, I think we learn how to deal more directly with human consciousness or we need to think how to deal more directly with human consciousness as both our interface and its operation through its content. So as our own understanding of our own means of cognition peels back more and more layers of our own onion, we're getting better appreciation for the diversity of human experience and the experience of other members of our biosphere. So we can better see that everything is a part of everything, and that we have to act increasingly in ways that are on the path to nurturing the myriad interconnectedness of our global condition, decentering our short-term self-interests for long-term global interests. And this has to then, from the arts, we then move this across all other aspects of our cultural activity, our sciences, our politics, our economics. And for this, I think it gives us a couple of paths forward for AI. One, AI continues to be invisibly propagated through our lives, and its invisibility is achieved through the means of things like camouflage or hijacking or extra perceptual phenomena. Or another is that it's manifested through these inscrutable minimalist objects, like our Alexas and of the world, where they have some discrete localization that indicates some aspect of their AI-ness. Maybe we can touch it or read it or hear it. Maybe it can do some of those things to us, but it's just a small marker to the much larger phenomena. Its physicality might be related to its purpose, or it might not be. It might just be symbolic. Or we could, another narrative trope, we can just put googly eyes on everything and use cuteness as a way to have AI more nefariously infiltrate our lives. But I would think of another way, what I characterize here as mutually assured enchantment. We come together with AI because we're fascinated by each other. We pluck each other's cognitive estrangement strings. We and AI will be part of each other, not as product and consumer, but as aggregate. We're going to be uncomfortable when we're unengaged with AI, cognitively naked, vulnerable, and less capable. A few years back, a friend of mine, the science fiction author Werner Vinge, in conversation was suggesting that our technologies are changing so fast that in just a few decades, the humans of that time will think of the humans of our time as having the cognitive abilities of goldfish because of our entwinement with AI. So in our utopian AI, our notions of self will change from the Enlightenment era individual to recognize that we are a dynamic expression of many closely coupled systems: social, cultural, ecological, and technological. Our methods will help us articulate this interconnectedness and be the basis for our ongoing pursuits of happiness and our dare to know. The fiction science of AI will develop in an increasingly tight coupling between speculation and actualization until these are perhaps no longer even distinguishable from each other. And that's a threshold that, in fact, we may have already crossed, but are just coming to terms to understand that we are now on that other side. So that's what I came here to talk to you guys about. I hope that made some sense and maybe planted some seeds that I didn't try to answer, but hopefully put some questions out there for you to mull over. Time, and would love to take some questions or have some conversation.
Great. Thank you, Sheldon. Appreciate. Thank you very much for your talk. And actually, I will ask our participants actually to put questions in the chat if they want to, so we can actually monitor those.
Okay, let me stop the share and try and pull up the chat. Okay.
So we have a question actually from Kim Grimfender actually, and he asks, how will our experiences in a metaverse impact our reality? How can you comment on that? How you think that would,
Well, I think what we're going to do is find that our metaverse experiences and our reality experiences will become blurred, so that we won't think of them as two separate realms, and it really will be at that point when we would actually be able to say that we now have a metaverse. And so our metaverse will contain both what we call our physical reality, and it will simultaneously contain any sort of kind of artificial augmentation or extension utilizing computational mediated experiences in that kind of coherent, a singular coherent place. I don't think we will leave one for the other. And I think everything that we've been doing to this point, as we kind of build early models of, I mean, we've been building virtual realities for 30, 40 years, and back in Utah in the mid 60s, Charles Surrey was building augmented reality displays, and so these things have had a long history. And I think where they've run into roadblocks is when we've asked people, well, leave your physical world to experience this virtual world, and which seems great for a few minutes, and then we're like, I like a lot of what's happening there, but I also like a lot of what's happening here, when I can really knock on wood. So we need to really converge those things. And what we will find, I think, is these ways in which it will be a radical acceleration of our social engagements. We will simultaneously collapse space and expand space. We will create more zones of intimacy and more kind of public engagement. So it's certainly going to be a significant time that's going to require us to think through in very fundamental ways how we want to organize our social realms, our laws, our political systems, a fairly comprehensive undertaking. Good luck to us.
This is a pretty optimistic view, actually, of what you're expressing now, indeed. But also we have some actually questions here in the chat, and says, how likely is that we have a robot uprising, right? So where everything would become so, perhaps, the humans are becoming a little bit of, the
secondary.
Right, second degree to the AIs, and then also we can live in completely, virtual world where the AI is actually controlling everything else, and we're just.
And I think that's kind of what I'm trying to lead to at the end of that talk, where I think we need to consider our human development in relationship to the development of AI, that our survival, in a way, kind of depends upon us coupling these two phenomena together, rather than seeing them as discrete and separate. And so, and there are likely going to be aspects of our reality that are better suited to the operation of truly artificial methods of intelligence, and many of those might have. They would just not even be concerned with our biological existence, likely. But the ones that but aspects of it that become more relevant, closer to the models and the needs and the interests and the capabilities and the methodologies that correlate to those things that are an aspect of our human cognition, that developing those things as as a cohort, as opposed to separate instances, I think is it would be the best way to ensure that we still play a necessary, profound, and determinate role in that development. So it's why I kind of think that one thing is truly interesting to me is how is that aspect of AI that is about trying to understand, biological cognition. And so the further we understand that and can make engagements with that, the more we become a part of it.
Right.
So I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist on all these things.
Yes, you are. Yes. So we have a number of questions in the chat, so I'll try to see whether I can summarize some of them. But it says, we have some other kind of things. Is like, do you think that AI can create art, can create original art, or could have the potential to do that?
Yeah, and I think it's, again, though, like maybe the more artificial AI, you know, does it have a need for art? And that might be the question, is like, what does art fulfill? Like, why do we have art? And you know, and so I kind of gave some indications of things I thought were kind of the reasons for art and what art does for the development of human culture and understanding. And so as the stakes of our human condition move forward, that increasingly involve AI, I think that the creation of art via means of artificial intelligence is absolutely necessary, critical, important, and viable to continue to play the cultural role that art has played. Right. And art has played a really different set of cultural roles over its history. You know, you know, and we often look back on the history of art from the perch that we're on for how we consider art as operational today. But art has, you know, quite different roles in different societies at different times in human history. And so as we move forward into a new era of human history, the kind of, you know, and we can somewhat abstract some of the kind of conditions from those, things about, you know, cohering meaning, you know, presenting, taking disparate elements and putting them together into patterns that are generative on their own, as a system on their own, and those are really powerful, effective, efficient ways of trying to take on really complex things. And so, you know, that in itself might have a particular value to AI systems, just because of its generative efficiency.
So related to that, we also have a little bit of another comment, actually. What do you think whether the AI is perhaps a materialization of the religion as well?
Yeah, you know, as I was answering that question, I was realizing I was venturing towards religion here. Yeah, you know, so I have another kind of thread of thinking about just the role of fiction. That fiction has had this profound role in the development of humanity, and it's, you know, because we have continuously made fictions about the world we live in, and again, to do that thing that art does, like we've needed to make a fiction about, you know, why these little lights at nighttime blink and move across the sky. So we've had to come up with stories about that to try to make that meaningful. And then, you know, we kind of created lenses and looked at it and said, oh my God, that wasn't at all what we thought it was. But at the time, it actually kind of allowed us to create a worldview. And so religions, you know, have been these ways in which we create worldviews that, you know, that do kind of like give us a sense of what is it, why are we here, why is anything here, you know, what does it mean, how should we be, you know, what, you know, all these kinds of really complicated questions get put into a coherent framework, and those are fictions or those are religions. And what's remarkable to me is, you know, that how much they get wrong, and yet we've survived. And so there's this thing about, I think, fiction, which has been just valuable enough in its ability to kind of sort through the complexities of being, to simplify it so that we can deal with it,
right,
while steering us in so many wrong ways as to what things actually are. So you know, these will continue to be, you know, things we deal with, and it's why I kind of, you know, am interested in this idea of like fiction and science and their relationship to each other.
So we have another question actually here, and a kind of comment and so forth that I would like your thoughts. It's a little bit different. We're going to a different aspect of that, thinking that, well, you know, there is a lot of need in these days and a lot of buzzwords and so forth about creating, you know, AI capabilities within organizations and so forth. So how you think that, well, in the future, and what is the role perhaps of universities, educational systems, and so forth to create these capabilities of who you think that will be developing the AI, how this is going to happen, and how, you know, you can actually get into the point, you know, where, you know, we will have this kind of interactions between, as you said, the humans and the AIs and so forth. So how this you think that is going to happen? Because all of this is happening, you know, quite fast, but also it's actually new things that perhaps you look at the, you know, 5-10 years ago, although they may have a lot of history, they were not there. So what are the workforce, if you will, that could help us get there?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's remarkable at how much development happens in this field from, you know, day to day, week to week, month to month, and, you know, things that you know, that we were trying to do, you know, 3 or 4 years ago that were, you know, really hard. You know, I mentioned I was doing this consulting work with Google about culture and AI, and, you know, I come to them and, like, you know, here's something I really think we should do, and they'd be like, oh my God, we can't do that. That's impossible. It will take, you know, this huge effort to produce a data set like that, and blah 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 blah. And then you kind of look at things today, and it's like, boom, that's just there. It's viable. It's easy. You know, there's a set of problems that are being incrementally solved,
Right.
and, you know, and they're being solved often by, you know, these kind of companies that have access to lots of computation and lots of data. You know, things like Google and Amazon, Facebook, Apple. You know, these companies are really, you know, found themselves in very interesting positions. And I think one of the things that it has got me to think about, maybe this isn't a direct answer to the question, because I probably don't know the direct answer to that question, which is a good question, but it does make me think about the relationship between academia and you know, kind of acts in the world, whether they're businesses or cultural acts, that you know, that there is increasing the need for I think our academic environments to have better fluidity and engagement with the kind of research academic work that's going on, and the engagement in, you know, the so-called real world inaction of those things. And I think that you know, closing those loops, making that a far more fluid, interactive dynamic is so important, I think, to not just allowing those 4 companies to be the gatekeepers to all this,
Right.
but developing more alternative methods, empowering more people with tools and capabilities, helping also kind of bring that insight back into the academic research environments to attenuate the directions things can go and should go. So to me, that's, I think, a big opportunity here that I'm seeing more and more of this happen, and I'm, you know, excited by it.
Great. I mean, it's 4:30, so I think that there are a couple of more questions, but I think that we want to thank Sheldon actually for his very stimulating talk and very provocative topic. I think, and I thank you all of our attendees and participants today, and for their questions as well as their attendance. Thank you all. And thank you, Sheldon, for taking the time, and we'll see you next time. Thank you all.
See you in Florida sometime soon here, I hope.
Absolutely.